In the murky waters of South Florida lives a strange-looking fish.
If you took a shark and a stingray and kind of melded the two of them together and put a saw on their head, that's a sawfish.
They swim like a shark, but they have a hedge trimmer for a nose.
This saw-like appendage is called a rostrum.
And you look at this really strange rostrum with these teeth on the side, and it's just otherworldly. And you think, wow, that must be an ancient fish. That's just so weird. Oh, big sawfish, big sawfish.
This is the small-toothed sawfish.
Okay, oh, don't wrap. Sawfish are just really cool group of fishes, really strange fishes. They're a small group of batoids, so they're related to stingrays and skates. The sawfish are really big animals too, 20 feet or so in length. They're incredible creatures.
They're probably on the same level of an ecosystem as a shark. They do feed on some of the same prey items, so they're a top-level predator.
But overfishing and habitat loss has led to the animal's drastic decline.
The small-toothed sawfish was the first native marine fish listed on the U.S. Endangered Species List.
The only place they're left in the United States is Southwest Florida.
They're just so cool. I mean, how sad would it be to lose something that is just that cool?
Scientists are studying the animals to help them survive into the future.
Here, little one.
This is an animal we really knew very, very little about, and we're starting from square one.
Can sawfish populations recover? Can these prehistoric-looking animals survive in a highly developed environment?
Major funding for this program was provided by the Batchelor Foundation, encouraging people to preserve and protect America's underwater resources, and by Divers Direct Emotion Club, inspiring the pursuit of tropical adventures and scuba diving.
Historically, sawfishes were a common tropical species worldwide.
There are 5 species globally. Around the turn of the century, 1920s, 1930s, almost all the species of sawfish globally began to decline.
Today, all the species of sawfish are listed as either endangered or critically endangered by the International Union for Conservation of Nature.
We're in danger of losing an entire family of large, tropical, shallow water predators that are one of the major components of the tropical ecosystems where they live.
Sawfish are different from saw sharks.
People confuse them sometimes. The saw sharks, there's 9 known species, and they're smaller than the sawfish, and they tend to be relatively deep water animals.
The small-toothed sawfish is the only current species of sawfish in the United States.
There are a handful of records from large-toothed sawfish, which is primarily a Central American species.
Small-toothed sawfish once ranged from as far north as New York to the Texas-Mexico border.
The center of the distribution of small-toothed sawfish has always been Florida in the United States. A lot of those far-reaching records were probably stray animals.
By the 1980s, the population had contracted to South Florida only.
Fishing played a large role in their population reductions. Because of their long-toothed rostrum, they're very susceptible to any type of fishing gear, in particular nets. Gill nets, trawls.
Historically, gill net mortality was probably very high before the gill net ban in Florida. In a shrimp trawl, if they get caught in that, and it's a trawl net that's been dragged for hours and hours, they're probably not going to survive. So that's probably the largest single source of direct mortality on them in Florida. They're such a weird looking fish that, a lot of times people would keep them and take pictures and show their friends.
Habitat loss also played a role in the decline of the population. Juvenile sawfish are very dependent on mangroves.
We've destroyed a lot of our mangrove coastline, so a lot of the habitat that was available for them 30, 40 years ago is not there anymore.
Once people realized the animals were in trouble, protections were put in place to save the sawfish.
Sawfish have been protected in Florida water since 1992.
Then, in 2003, the small-toothed sawfish was also listed on the federal endangered species list.
There's a recovery plan that is in place, and so we're trying to conduct research that will allow us to track recovery of the population. Prior to them being listed on the endangered species list, we really, as scientists, knew very little about the species, so we initially contacted anyone who would have information, whether it be a recreational fisherman, or we talked to people at bait shops, we talked to commercial fishermen, and we just started to keep track of those encounters. And once we started plotting those on the map, it led us to some of these areas where we want to do some scientific research.
May have to push me off there, Joe.
Dean Grubbs and his team from the Florida State University Coastal and Marine Laboratory study adult sawfish in the Florida Keys.
The questions we're asking are, where are the primary areas and times of year where sawfish interact with different fishing interests, whether it be recreational charter fishermen, commercial longline fishermen, or commercial trawl fishermen. Obviously, recreational guys catching them and releasing them are far less of a concern than, shrimp trawls, where a lot of them die. There's a quota on the number of sawfish that are allowed to be caught within the commercial fishery before it has to be shut down. And so if we could highlight areas where there's the highest likelihood that a shrimp trawl might encounter a sawfish, and then just say, okay, don't fish those areas during these months, then that's going to benefit everybody, because that'll mean that the shrimp fishery can keep fishing as long as they're fishing sustainably, and the sawfish will be allowed to recover. We were searching in two primary areas. We would prefer to spend most of our time on the edge of the continental shelf, where it's about 45 to 55 meters deep, because that's where they get captured in commercial longline fisheries and commercial shrimp trawl fisheries. So that's off on the Atlantic side of the Florida Keys, all the way from off Key Largo all the way down to the Marquesas south of Key West. We also sample in Florida Bay, because that's an area where we know there are a lot of sawfish, and that's where the recreational fishermen and the charter captains encounter a lot of sawfish too. It's quite shallow and muddy and murky, and it's completely different habitat.
Today, winds are too rough to fish on the Atlantic side, so the team decides to work in Florida Bay.
We're primarily using kind of a modified scientific long line. We basically set 50 hooks out on a long line anchored on each end. Each hook is on its own branch line that's about 9 feet long, and it's baited with ladyfish. We set for exactly 1 hour, and then we haul the line back. We do it for only 1 hour for a few reasons. One, we do want to minimize stress on the sawfish, but we don't want to kill things that we're not trying to catch. Big lemon. Hold on. Settle down. Hold on, let me get the head first. Obviously, we're going to catch more non-endangered species than endangered ones, so we catch a lot more sharks. And we've caught about 1,000 sharks compared to 30 or so sawfish. Rarely do we have a shark that dies on the line or anything doing this work. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Gone.
While the long line is soaking, the scientists decide to download data that gives them information on the movement of the animals.
So these are acoustic receivers that our colleagues at the University of Florida, the Florida Museum of Natural History, put out. And so every time there's a coded acoustic transmitter that comes within the detection range of one of these, It gets picked up with a time and date stamp and the number of the animal. And so they've tagged quite a few sawfish in here. We've tagged a few as well with these transmitters.
We have detections on this receiver from 3 sawfish. One of the sawfish was tagged last March, and it was tagged right near the receiver. The detections from that animal are from the day it was tagged and the very next day, and then it wasn't detected again. The other 2 animals were tagged elsewhere in the bay.
Eventually, the scientists have a sawfish on the line.
Oh, big sawfish, big sawfish. Look down here, look, 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 look. Try to get him unwrapped. All right. Okay. These sawfish are dangerous to deal with because they're so incredibly strong.
Oh, don't wrap, don't wrap.
The dangerous part of them extends 3 or 4 feet from their body. The radius of the potential damage can be, 10 feet. And they are so strong and so heavy and so quick, swinging that rostrum from side to side. Think, oh man, this is an incredible animal. What an incredible experience to see this thing. The first order of business is to get a rope on the rostrum. Once we have the rostrum, then we can cleat that off, and then we can reach down and put a rope on the tail. Now he's ours. Now he's ours. Ah! Then we'll take a number of typical measurements, fork length and the length from the tip of the snout to the beginning of the tail to the end of the tail. That's the biggest male we've ever caught right there, by 10 centimeters. So that's a big guy. Cool. We also take the length of the rostrum. We'll count the number of teeth on the rostrum. 23 on the left, 24 on the right. So now we're putting on a satellite tag. You'll notice I drilled a small hole through the front end of the first dorsal fin. You may have also noticed there was not a drop of blood. There's really no vascularization in that part, which is one of the reasons we put it in there. And so we just want this thing to stay on long enough to get the data from the tag. Once the tag pops off, we want this whole harness to come off, so all these crimps and everything will corrode, and then the wire can work its way out, and it'll be none the worse for wear. This one's programmed to stay on for 150 days, and then that will float to the surface, and all the light, temperature, and depth data that it's logged will be transmitted. Then we'll hopefully be able to know where it's gone for the next 3.5 months or so. A couple of the ones we tagged in the Florida Keys in 2013, the tags popped off all the way up as far as Tarpon Springs.
Dean also puts an acoustic tag on the animal.
These are the tags that will actually be picked up by those receivers we've been checking. So that'll give us information about when the animals come back to those areas. Could give us information on migration patterns up the East Coast or in other places in the Gulf of Mexico too. And then finally we put a DART tag, and that's just a simple identification tag. It just has a number on it. It's a National Marine Fisheries Service tag. And so if someone catches that sawfish again, or if we catch that sawfish again, then we can look up the information on it and know where it was tagged. If it's measured, we'll get an idea of growth rates. So that's a cheap way to tag an animal in theory for its lifetime. And we've actually recently captured 2 sawfish in Florida Bay that were tagged with DART tags by our colleagues a year before at the same spot. So that's pretty good evidence that during that time of the year, that's where they come. So that's valuable too.
Historical data suggests that large sawfish may have migrated north during the summer months, but the data collected from the tags so far hasn't confirmed that. Before long, the scientists have a female sawfish on the line.
So this one's 448, so this one ties the largest that we've caught so far in our research. Females are bigger than males. Beautiful fish. And she's being so sweet. So she's being sweet.
In addition to tagging the animals and measuring them, the researchers also collect blood samples to see if the sawfish may be pregnant or have just given birth.
So then hopefully we can find out, okay, it seems that they are preparing to mate in spring, for example. And then if we can find from our satellite tagging data where they are during those time periods, perhaps we can find whether they're mating in aggregations or if it's just kind of haphazard, because that all plays a big role in the potential for recovery of the population.
By looking at the sex hormones in the blood of both male and female animals, the scientists hope to gain a better understanding of the animal's life history. Sawfish, like their relatives, the sharks and rays, take a long time to mature. They have relatively few offspring compared to other fish, which means the recovery of the population takes longer.
Based on what data we have, we think they mature in about 8 to 10 years. So we believe that they reproduce every 2 years, but it could be that they're reproducing every year. We think they produce about 8 to 12 pups.
Unlike most fish, sawfish give birth to live young.
Everyone's first thought is, poor mom, how does that happen? It's really cool in that the rostrum is very flexible when they come out. But the teeth are needle sharp, but they're almost completely enclosed in a gelatinous material that sheaths the teeth so they don't damage the mom. And then over the first week or so, that sheath disintegrates. Little clip.
Dean also takes a small thin clip for genetic analysis that will help the scientists understand how different animals are related to one another.
During the endangered species listing, it was estimated that the population may have declined by 90% or more, 95% maybe even. And so there's the potential for genetic bottleneck. It's essentially inbreeding. But fortunately, they found no evidence of that. So it still seems like there's plenty of genetic diversity out there.
In addition, the scientists used the genetic samples to determine if there is a distinct sawfish population in the U.S., or if the animals migrate back and forth to the Bahamas. So far, it appears they are separate populations.
The sawfish we've tagged with satellite tags have stayed within the United States, within Florida actually.
Another team of scientists from NOAA's Southeast Fisheries Science Center studies juvenile sawfish.
Our survey is in 3 areas in the backcountry in Southwest Florida. We're up in Goodland and around Marco Island. We also are in the 10,000 Islands area, and then our most southern area is Everglades National Park. We started in 2009.
Since we began this survey, the trend is for a slowly increasing population, which is great.
The animals are most abundant in the protected areas of Everglades National Park.
It was very interesting that the Everglades National Park was created in the 1930s, and this was about the same time that the sawfish population started to decline. So it was sort of, call it serendipity, call it luck, that historically this was the core area of their population in the United States to begin with, and then to have that core area set aside as a national park was probably one of the reasons why we still have sawfish left in the U.S.
Every month, the researchers spend a week in the field studying the animals.
So what we've been doing is tracking the abundance of the individuals through time, because for recovery to occur, we have to have the population abundance to occur. Prior to the listing, we really didn't have a sawfish survey that would measure the abundance of animals through time.
We use small, very small gill nets. The teeth on the saw, they swim right into the net and they get caught, and they can just rest on the bottom and wait for us to come get them. So it's very low stress. So we'll soak anywhere from an hour to maybe 2 hours, but we check the net continually. A lot of catch and release going on.
This team collects a lot of the same data as their colleagues studying the adult sawfish.
We tag the animal externally with a dart tag and internally with a pit tag. This pit tag is a tiny little transponder. It comes with like a barcode, like what your vet would use to tag your cat or your dog. So if an animal ever loses its external tag, we have a scanner that we can scan over the animal and it'll pop up like a barcode number.
Juvenile sawfish depend on mangrove habitats as their nursery areas.
Current theory is that they're using the mangroves when they're very small for protection from predators. Probably the predators for a small sawfish would be something like a bull shark or a lemon shark, or maybe even alligators might feed on the occasional sawfish. The mangroves also may be used as a food source because there's lots of little fishes and stuff in there for them to feed on.
What's puzzling the experts is why the sawfish seem to prefer some mangrove areas over others.
The areas may be very close together, What is the difference between that spot and that spot, and why are they always right on that mud flat adjacent to that section of mangroves as opposed to that mud flat on the other side, when easily they could swim 100 yards and go to that spot?
To figure out what the sawfish might be attracted to, the scientists try to quantify the environmental conditions.
One of the things we've been examining is 3 factors related to the mangroves. One, more related to black mangroves, is what is the density of these pneumatophores? The structure of the prop root system. Some prop roots are very much spread apart, others are much more dense. So we've been counting the number of prop roots within a 150 centimeter square grid. And then also one thing we noticed that was interesting too is the distance of the overhang that covers the shoreline will differ depending on what mangrove stand you're at. So we've been measuring the distance from the edge of the last prop root out to where the edge of the overhang ends. Looking at the data that we've collected over the last 5 years, there appears to be some difference between how the mangroves are structured and whether the sawfish is there or not.
The NOAA team also collects tissue samples for genetic analysis.
We'll catch sawfish on the same mudflat year after year after year. What we found is that actually some of those animals are siblings or half siblings. The current theory is that the females come up in here to give birth. She may give birth on the same area and the individuals are always returning to that same area, sort of like salmon coming back to the same natal river every year.
This could have implications for animals living in less pristine areas where lots of human development has taken place. That's where Greg Polakis and his team from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission come in. Based out of the Charlotte Harbor Field Laboratory, they also study juvenile sawfish, but their study sites are a lot less pristine than the wilderness of Everglades National Park.
Both of the areas that we sample are much more developed and have a lot more human influence. In the Charlotte Harbor area, the 2 primary locations where we sample are in the Peace River, as well as some of the upper harbor areas, and the Caloosahatchee River, which is down by Fort Myers. We've been working in this area doing research on small-tooth sawfish since shortly after they were listed on the endangered species list.
Just as in the Everglades, the animals here also seem to have hot spots they prefer.
They will stay on a flat, probably very close to where they were born, for several months. Probably the majority of the first year is in the greater region where they were actually born. As they get larger, they tend to expand their use of space and use more of the nursery. We catch newborn size, which is about 2.5 feet or so total length, including the saw, up to about 7 feet. That's 2 to 3 years old.
Sawfish grow very fast when they're young, doubling in size during their first year of life. This greatly reduces their risk of being eaten by sharks or other predators.
We'll keep this punch from the fins for genetics and stable isotope type of research.
Stable isotope analysis provides information about the diet of the animals.
That information has kind of shown that they eat primarily fish at all the sizes that have been sampled so far. So that's something that is new. There's very little information beyond just anecdotal things on feeding biology of these animals.
Sawfish use their rostrum to catch their prey.
They've been observed swinging it back and forth into a school of smaller fish, for example. They wound a couple of those and then return and feed on them.
The first fin is going to get a roto tag, we call it, where it actually has the number of this fish and a phone number. So if an angler happens to catch this one, they can tell us which one it is. And then the second dorsal will use the same setup, and that we've glued an acoustic tag to, so we can tell where they're swimming. We have a series of listening stations out here in the river.
They're distributed in both the upper harbor, Peace River area, as well as the greater Caloosahatchee area. Those units listen for those acoustic tags 24 hours a day. So we're able to see how long they stay in the hot spots, and then hopefully we'll be able to estimate when they actually leave and move to other coastal habitats. Recently there was a fish that we tagged in April of 2011 in the Caloosahatchee River, and it died and showed up on a beach in Key West. So that is obviously a pretty significant move.
Because sawfish are listed on the endangered species list, it is illegal for fishermen to target the animals.
If a recreational fisherman, does accidentally catch the sawfish, we want the animal to be off the hook as quickly as possible. And instead of trying to remove the hook, we would ask if it's not possible to cut the hook off as close as you can to the mouth to release the animal. The longer the animal fights on the line, the less chances that it would have a survival.
We have had some cases recently of fishermen actually removing sawfish from the water to take photos. Technically that's illegal and they could get in trouble for that. What we would like fishermen, if they catch them, is to estimate the size and call the International Sawfish Encounter database folks and report it. And that goes a long way to informing us of where sawfish are.
Much is being done to save the small-toothed sawfish from extinction. With support from the public and through the diligent work of researchers, this prehistoric-looking fish may have a chance to survive in a modern world.
Major funding for this program was provided by the Batchelor Foundation, encouraging people to preserve and protect America's underwater resources, and by Divers Direct, Emotion Club, inspiring the pursuit of tropical adventures and scuba diving, and by the Do Unto Others Trust.